this is the Meet the Museum series at the Champaign County History Museum. Here today we have our Education Committee Chair on our Board of Trustees, Dr. Lindsay Andrews. I'm Kenneth Murphy, the social media intern. How are you doing today, Lindsay?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Getting over this hot weather, are you?
It's really hot out. It's really hot out right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be a stretch, and it's only early June. So you have the rest of the summer to look forward to.
Let's get started.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from the Chicago suburbs. Sometimes it's easier to explain where you're at and then the communities around it to help kind of orient yourself if you're from that area. So I'm from Joliet, but it's the part of Joliet that's close to Plainfield and Aurora and Minooka and Channahon and that area. So the southwest suburbs.
And where are you located now?
I currently live in Champaign. We live by Morrissey Park, a beautiful little park where my kiddos love to play, and love it there.
Nice. Okay. So first of all, I want to say your education career is very impressive. You have a BA and a PhD in English. Can you talk a bit about what drew you to studying English?
Yeah, it's a bit of a story. It's a heartfelt story. I knew from a really early age that I was really good at reading and writing, and it's not a flex, but it's the absolute truth that when I was in elementary school, my fourth grade teacher identified this skill, reading specifically, and she contacted my parents and tried to get them to get me to engage with classic literature. So that was the first time that I encountered Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, abridged versions. I wasn't reading like the full-blown classic lit in fourth grade. But like Barnes & Noble has like children's versions of classic lit, so that's how I was exposed to those stories early on. And then as I moved through middle school and in high school, I continued to explore more advanced classic literature, unabridged versions. And I just realized that I was connecting with those stories and reading them differently than my peers. I was reading them very carefully and slowly, and in ways that allowed me to think more deeply about not just what the story is about, but how it is written. And one thing that a lot of English teachers, English professors will often say is that good readers are good writers and good writers are good readers. So those two skill sets kind of run hand in hand. For me, because I read so carefully and so deeply, that skill set transferred to my writing as well. So when it came time to apply for schools and to convey a general interest in a major, like I knew that English was something that I was just good at. I didn't quite know how I wanted to use it because I had a multifaceted interest in the arts in general. I could have taught, but that wasn't necessarily on my radar. So when I applied to undergraduate schools, I told them, yeah, English, I like to read and I like to write. When I started taking classes, I did my BA work at the University of Illinois. I was exposed to it always starts with one really good professor, and she happened to be a graduate teaching assistant. She was a lecturer, so she was at the tail end of her academic career, and she saw that I had an interest in women's writing and the way that women crafted stories. And her class was taught under the guise of a women's science fiction unit, as though like the way that women can communicate their stories and the complexities of their lives was through like alternate realities, alternate universes. This is a long-winded answer. I did not go into science fiction. What I'm trying to convey is that I realized that I needed more than just English in my academic career to kind of get me to engage with, both academically and professionally, the kind of level of critical thinking about English and storytelling and history than just an English degree. So that's why I acquired 2 minors, one in art history and one in American history. Art history is similar to English in that, at least the way that I see it and the way that I convey it, it's the history of art to be that way. But art is a text. Art is a visual text. And when you study English, you kind of take up critical frameworks of feminist readings of history, capitalist readings of history, modernist, new critical histories. Mine was always historical, that art, writing, paintings, etc., they're a product of the time and people that they're created. It's sometimes reflective, but not always linear. So that's my undergrad life. But the point is, like, and I think you could probably tell just by the way I like to talk about English and the arts, that I didn't necessarily want to teach, but I loved reading and I loved researching. I loved doing the thing off the unbeaten path, trying to think of new and different ways to look at books that we come across just standardly. So reading like The Great Gatsby, but then talking about it and thinking about it in ways that other people might not have before. And if you're at that level, and if you are interested in thinking about books in that way, then you're often kind of guided to, well, maybe you want to do graduate work. Maybe if you have a different thing to say about this thing that's been around for a long time, then maybe you can acquire that research and formalize it through the skills that you would acquire through the PhD program. I applied for a PhD program in 2020, that was not 2020, 2010, which was the start of the housing crisis. So it was really hard to get into graduate school. And I have no idea why I decided to apply direct admit, but I knew that I wanted to get my PhD. So I did it, and that's actually an ill-advised move. I would strongly advise getting your master's degree first and then moving into a PhD. But I was like, let's do it. And the school that I really wanted to go to was the University of Nebraska, because at the time I was interested in the author Willa Cather, who's a Nebraska writer, and the ways in which she wrote about the Great Plains during the late 19th and early 20th century, sort of on the cusp of like modernism, that kind of thing. So that's where I went. I think I answered your question. Get me talking about books and I'll just keep going.
Yeah. So as a current college student, I'm so intrigued with what people study in college and how it ties to part of their career. So what did you end up doing post PhD, like in your career, that kind of led you to the museum?
Well, I knew when you're in graduate school and you have to decide kind of early on whether or not your work is going to make you move towards like tenure track teaching, if that's like your pathway, or if you're going to try to professionalize it in a different way, either within academia or in a professional way. Because I was so interested in reading deeply about books and writing about books and thinking differently about what we would call and consider texts, paintings as texts, books as texts, I realized that maybe like the classroom wasn't exactly the place where I thrived the most. And I realized pretty quickly that it was museums, a place where I could really combine all of these interests in art and in literature and in history, and think about the complex ways in which we can use material and visual culture to craft narratives and to convey historical narratives within, rooms. So while I was completing my PhD, I worked as a curatorial assistant and interned at the Sheldon Museum of Art at the University of Nebraska, which is like the equivalent of the Krannert Art Museum here on campus at UIUC. I completed research projects for them. I wrote object labels. That's where my publication is. I contributed to one of their painting or works on paper, like etching catalogs. I was given an object to write about, and then I contributed my analysis and research of it, and then they published that. And I curated my own exhibit near the end of my career. So what am I doing with it now? All of that work. I graduated in 2020, and that's when the world kind of shut down. Mm-hmm. Museums shut down. And the thing about academia is that once you're out, it's really hard to get back in. So it was incumbent on me to figure out the ways that I could use my MacGyver skills that I'd acquired over the past 14 years in school in different ways. And that's kind of how I came to this museum and kind of offered everything that I know to this point on a volunteer basis.
Nice. Sorry. So happy 1 year anniversary at the museum.
Thank you.
So you're at the museum now. How'd you get your start here?
I love living in Champaign, and Champaign is great because it's a university town and it has a bunch of little museums around. Once my children reached a certain age that I had some more flexibility to kind of move around a bit, because I stayed at home with them, I began kind of testing the waters to see which museum had available spaces for volunteer work, because I know that a museum is a place that is receptive to my skills, that I have experience in, and that I could thrive in. I never really thought about a straight up history museum before because of my background in art and art history. But history and thinking critically about objects, there's such an easy through line that it's like, well, of course I should look into history museums. So I approached the Champaign County History Museum a little over a year ago. The previous manager kind of got wind of my interest and kind of talked with me, interviewed me, learned more about my interest. It was like, you should really consider like hanging around here a little bit. And like, that sounds like a good idea. And the rest is history. I have the time right now to give as much as I can to the museum, and I enjoy it a lot. So that's kind of how I came about here.
Yeah. And so on our board, you're education chair. How did you end up in that position?
I am going on and on about how much I love books and art and museums, but like the bulk of my professional experience is actually in teaching. I taught as a lecturer at the University of Nebraska in the English department, writing and literature. And what's unique about UNL is that they do not give their lecturers or their GTAs prescribed syllabus or an expected course list of books that you need to teach from. You're given like almost complete freedom. Like you have to fit the aims and scopes of the department and the university, but you can create your own syllabus. Like the classroom is yours. So as an interdisciplinarian, I took that chance and I ran with it. And all of my classes that I taught, literature and writing, all had interdisciplinary components, really latched on to history and to community projects. So when I conveyed my interest to the museum about education and my own personal and professional experience in pedagogy, it was a good fit. I think it's a good fit. That's kind of how it started.
And so what do you do as education chair?
In the past year, what we're trying to do is to connect with schools in and around Champaign County. And we're trying to, honestly, right now, meet classrooms where they are to kind of gauge what the teachers in the different districts need, what kinds of units they're exploring right now within the field of history, and to either do classroom visits with objects or invite them to the museum to explore and have practice kind of using those skill sets that they learn in the classroom within the museum setting. It's really kind of like setting the foundation. But on a larger scale, we're thinking about the identity of this museum and how this museum might think about what its educational purposes. Like what is the thing that this museum is good at in the field of education? How can we extend that branch to other schools so that if they're missing something, even if they don't know if they're missing it, they can look to us and they know that they can get it. So right now, broadly speaking, we're really good at community-based education. We're really good at community narratives, historical narratives, and we have so many objects that it's a great opportunity for kiddos to literally just explore primary source objects outside of the classroom and develop an interest in whatever it is that they're interested in. It doesn't have to be history, maybe it's something else. So that's kind of I try to do as someone who coordinates all of that.
Yeah. And so what prospective projects, you mentioned kind of kids coming in here, would that look like a field trip or like a guided tour, or and then like what would it look like when we come into the classroom? You mentioned like getting your hands on a like an object, but how would that work out?
I would love to have more classroom visits here because I think that when you're outside of the classroom, and I know this from experience as an educator, because I took my classes out into the community, into different museums on campus in Nebraska. It's just, it's a different experience. You feel less like tied down to the chalkboard or the dry erase board or whatever you have in your classroom. And you're a little more quick to think, you're on your feet, and there's a willingness to explore in ways that you might not when you're sort of confined to the desk. But the problem is that this museum as it exists right now is a finite space, and the most recent classroom visit that we had to kind of coordinate a couple different classrooms into different spaces in the museum, and it felt like you were kind of doing Tetris to make sure that no too many people are in one room at one time. But at the same time, the museum staff that was here to help facilitate that field trip experience did it, and it makes me think that we can do it again. I think that there's a really, this is so hokey, there's like a magical quality to like the tactile experience of touching historical things and to experiencing things outside of a textbook that sort of like lights up a different part of our brain and gets us to think differently and critically about things, especially when you're like in our community room around a desk with a bunch of objects. It's just different. So yeah, I'd love to have more classroom visits here, but I also love the idea of traveling to places because not all classrooms have the flexibility of being able to come here. And one of the things that I know that I'm invested in is reaching out to some of the more rural environments, the community schools that don't necessarily have an easy trip. Like Edison can just come over, right? Booker T. Washington can just come over, Urbana can just come over. But it's a little bit harder to go all the way over to like St. Joe. And that requires, especially as an education committee chairperson, a lot more active reaching out to administration, reaching out to the teachers to kind of ask what do you need, and then offer the things that we have that might suit their needs. So it's a little bit of both. It's having people come here, but it's also like the willingness and eagerness to visit them too.
Do you have any, like, I've heard about your snow day plans, snow day projects. How are you working on that this summer, or what's going on with that project?
I can't take credit for this. Okay. It's my husband's idea. My husband is an educator. He teaches in Monticello. He's a high school sped teacher. And one of the things that he likes to do is create creative activities for snow days and cold days. Like there's a total acknowledgement that no one wants to do any work on a snow day. And I'm going to date myself here. And when I was in school, like we didn't have the whole Zoom thing. So snow day was a snow day. And that was it. There was no like taking home Chromebooks. There's no like snow day packet. It was like snow days are snow days. So the expectation that students have when you know that you're not going to school, but then you have to do something else, there's some friction there. So what he suggested is to have fun and accessible snow day units available to kids on the days where they would be expected to do work that really is work, but it's also kind of like fun stuff. So I'm interested in exploring the ideas of like creating a little micro unit where you can have these little things to do that teachers can offer to their students on days where they're not in the classroom. That's easily available online, and they can complete work in that way. So like we've got a bunch of digital texts. Maybe transcribing a handwritten letter that we have in our collection. Maybe that's a micro unit. maybe uh, maybe having an object, like a digital object online, and then asking students to imagine some historical narrative about it. Like, what do you think this thing that looks so funny is used for, and then writing like a couple sentences on it. So it's a way of exposing our collection and making available our collection to educators, while at the same time giving kids access to something just other than like worksheets. So yeah.
And you're also on other committees on the board. So what kind of committees are you working on, and what projects are you trying to bring to those committees as well?
I think I'm on every other committee at this point. And a part of it is just my willingness to volunteer to do a lot for this museum, because I believe in its mission to support the narratives and to steward the objects that this community generously enables us to, protect and to preserve. I recently joined have been participating in collections committee conversations. That's something that I had never done when I was working at the University of Nebraska. Typically, when you're volunteering for a museum, you kind of pick a facet of the museum. Maybe it's education, maybe it's curatorial, maybe it's collections, or you're with like the registrar. Mine was always curatorial, and my experience in a museum is really primarily curatorial. So collections is fun for me because I love seeing the ways that, like, it's like looking into like the mechanics of how museums work, like how things come in and how we deaccession and how we accession. The process of deciding like whether or not this object suits the mission of the museum and if it's a good fit for our museum. I'd never done that before, so it's learning a new skill. I am involved in the exhibits committee as a consultant, and assisting, like if my experience is curatorial, it's a natural fit. So I love supporting the existing curatorial work that's happening here. Probably aside from the education committee, the most active committee that I'm on right now is what do we call it? Events and development, events and advancement. And it's spawned from the museum's trivia night, which is a social fundraiser event. And the group of people in this committee are jubilant and fun, and they're active, and I learn a lot from them just being around them. But also, I love that this event enables me to participate in the nitty-gritty of actually like meeting people who are interested in our museum, like meeting the community members. Like, this is the thing that I'm like desperately like hungry for, like getting to know the people who invest their time, who donate their things, who are coming into this space. Like, I want to know more about them, why they're interested in this space, so that I can better serve them in an educational capacity, in a curatorial capacity. Like, the more you know about them, the more you can do for them. And this is a committee that enables me to kind of do that. So I might be missing one, but I don't think I am.
So you kind of touched on you're wanting to get involved more with the people, and like that really inspires you. So how does living in Champaign affect your involvement with the museum and just being a part of Champaign County in general?
I'll be candid when I say that I wholly acknowledge that I am like the obnoxious Chicago suburbanite who comes to Champaign, goes to school here, meets her future husband in a classroom, and husband is a local, and convince him to spend 10 years in Nebraska alone. Like, we were the only ones in Nebraska, but we missed his family. So like, what does being in Champaign do? It enables me to, I can never be a local. I get that. I totally get that. But my husband is a local, and my children, at this point, I don't want to get emotional when I think about this, but they've spent more time in Champaign than they have in the state in which they were born, in Nebraska. So they're more local than I am. But my husband's family has deep ties to Champaign. They have both his mother and his father were farming families, and I know that they might end up watching this interview. But what I'll say is, like, I never really appreciated what that meant until I was an adult and I lived in Nebraska, and I came back, and like how deeply important like your family history is if you are local here. And as an outsider looking at it and reading it, like, I just have the utmost respect for it. Not even like just farming families or the farming community, but families that commit their time, their like generations of their time to Champaign. Like, there's what is so special about Champaign as an outsider is that people come back here. they and it blows me away. Like, I don't want to say no one goes back to Joliet. That's not totally true. I didn't go back to Joliet, but I came to school in Champaign. I went to Nebraska, and like when the time came and it was 2020 and we're like, okay, well, let's figure out where to go after this, we came back to Champaign, and like there was no question. And we had the option of moving back up to the suburbs where there's more museums, more access to jobs, more teaching opportunities for my husband. But there's something about being in Champaign, like the siren call of Champaign. It's like this little perfect oasis. So being a part of this community, my daughters are being raised here. Like, I'm invested in their education and their livelihood. And this is totally corny, but as a mom, I'm invested in the livelihood and education of the other kiddos that benefit from our work here. That sort of circulate around this community. It's something I really want to be a part of. I'm totally jealous of you locals. I really am. So I'm going to spend my life's work trying to be an honorary one. So.
Yeah. Is the museum all you're currently up to? You've mentioned your kids. How is anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, I'm living that mom life. I really am right now. But what I will say is, this is a way that I can use my skills to the best of my abilities that I've cultivated over the past like 14 years. And at the same time, it gives me the flexibility to be a part of my kiddos' lives in a meaningful way. They keep me very busy. It's the summer, so my oldest constantly wants to swim. She has like this internal clock where she knows that it's a certain time of the day that we like to go to the pool. So she'll like bring me her swimsuit. My youngest, she's starting to get there at this point, but I continue to hold hope that even after COVID and museums are starting to kind of they've been reopening, but they've also been reimagining what kind of space that they want to identify as post-COVID in this point in time. I'm still trying to find a place to fit in, and this is a place where I do feel like I fit in, and it's in a volunteer capacity. So I love that I have the flexibility of bouncing around and being whatever kind of helpful person that I can possibly be. Kind of meandered around that answer, but yeah.
All right, that's all the questions I have for today.
Okay.
Is there anything else you would like to share or promote, or just that you want to include in this interview?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Other than I'm really proud to be here. I feel a great sense of responsibility in the best possible way to be a part of this organization and the way that this organization continues to serve the community and to steward its artifacts and to champion its narrative. And I'm really glad to help in the ways that I've been able to help so far. Mm-hmm.
Well, that concludes our interview with Dr. Lindsay Andrews, our education chair on the Board of Trustees.